Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm Hattie Hamlin, the Executive Director of the Marconi Society, and I'm only going to talk for a second. And it's really important, though, for me to speak because I really want to thank some people. The Cal IT2 people, UCSD, have been phenomenal partners in this. And we have appreciated so much the support that they've given us. We've had help from all the tech people and Sarah Beckman and Tiffany Fox and Sammy Romanen and especially Ramesh Rao and Paul Siegel, who threw his weight behind this to help us put this together. We cannot thank you enough, and we hope that we'll have many other opportunities to partner with you. And now I'm going to introduce Ramesh Rao.
So I would like to start by asking our panelists for the first session to please come on stage and be seated. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to Atkinson Hall.
Right. Need signs on both sides. Yeah, I noticed that before I came up.
This facility is the home of the UCSD division of an institute called the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology. Let me at the outset convey Larry Smarr's regrets for not being able to participate in person. Cal IT2 has a presence not only at UCSD but also UC Irvine, and he had prior commitments at the Irvine division, so he couldn't be here with us. But Larry's focus on the future of the internet has been a guiding principle for much of what goes on in Cal IT2. So we were delighted when we were approached by the Marconi Society and Paul Siegel at CMRR to help with hosting the 2 days worth of activities that the Marconi Symposium is about. So the first session this morning is titled, How Will the Internet Survive? To be honest, it has evolved, the title, a bit, and hopefully through these presentations, we will have a better sense of what the future might hold, notwithstanding all the previous predictions that have been proven to be wrong. So let me say a few words to convey the overall framework for how we have structured this particular panel. So we have 4 speakers. Irvin Jacobs needs no introduction, co-founder of Qualcomm. And we cannot resist bragging of his involvement with UCSD going back to the 70s when he was a professor here. He really needs no introduction, but permit me also to acknowledge his role in helping create this institute, the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology. Not only his visionary support, but also financial backing helped launch this. So he has a special place in our hearts here. Irvin will be talking about the mobile internet access explosion. In an effort to provoke your imagination a bit for the dialogue that we hope we will have after the presentations have been made, we've decided to introduce one live demonstration of today's technologies, how they're helping launch perhaps new applications and new industries that take advantage of the infrastructure that's already here. So this is a reflection really of the present. And none better than our own Tom DeFonte, an early pioneer in building augmented reality systems, to not just talk, but also share some glimpses of the reality of what we're calling networked gigabit digital media. So Tom will be our second presenter. We like to do lots of live demos, and many of you here are engineers. Things always have a way of going wrong, and so if they go wrong, I think on this occasion we might call on your personal expertise to debug. So you'll help us get through it if we need your help. We'll then have Vint Cerf, Chief Internet Evangelist at Google, talk about challenges as the internet breaks the IPv4 barrier. Vint, of course, continues to blaze a unique trail in his life. And again, the only thing I want to brag about here today is the fact that he's on our external advisory board here at Cal IT2. So we kind of claim a small little sliver of Vint. He's I think, spoken already yesterday, and I think he'll be also participating in the second session. I think I'm looking forward certainly to hearing him make sense of what he and a few others many years ago wrought upon us in the form of the internet as it was then conceived. We'll then wrap up with one of our research scientists here at Cal IT2, Albert Lin. And we've kind of set it up just so we can draw out the contrast between how folks, when Vint and his colleagues designed the internet, thought of what it might be used for, and how people like Albert and his collaborators have appropriated it for things that perhaps it was not originally intended. It's how do you engage lots and lots of minds to do some collaborative problem solving in unexpected ways. Perhaps we should have titled this, How the Internet Will Change Our Understanding of the Past, because as you will learn when Albert talks about what he's doing, that it's really taking a new look at the past using technologies of the present. Missing from this lineup is Jack Wolf. Toby is here with us, Sarah is here with us. He remains close in our thoughts as we think of how future accomplishments will rely critically on the work of early pioneers. As I mentioned, we have set aside 30 minutes for a dialogue after the talk, so please hold your questions for the end unless they are directed very specifically at the presentation that we'll see. I also want to take this opportunity to mention that later in the day, after both panels are over the lunch break and beyond, we have made arrangements for those of you who are interested in touring through two of our labs, one that does work on photonics. This is a lab on the 6th floor that Professor Stoyan Radic, Stoyan, are you in the room yet? Not yet, has helped create. Bill Kuo, one of the young Marconi scholars who received the award yesterday, is one of Stoyan's students, and the lab in which the work was done is one of the labs that we would like you to have the opportunity to see. In addition, we also are opening up our wireless labs, making the connection with Marconi. Peter Asbeck, Peter, are you here? He will be, with Don Kimball, able to talk about some of the pioneering work taking place on energy-efficient wireless communication system design. So now it's my pleasure to invite Irvin to present his talk on the mobile internet access explosion. Irvin?
So you can see what's going on. You know, that's not a bad idea. Mr. Chairman, do you mind if we sit down there so we can see the slides? Sure. All right, sit down.
Hello. Yep. Thanks very much, Ramesh. It's a great pleasure to be here. And of course, it's a very special day for me today, so this adds a little bit even further to it. Also, very pleased to see how far Cal IT2 has come since the original days of thinking about it, contemplating what might possibly be accomplished, and then, of course, seeing it go well beyond that. So it's been very special. Also, it's been very special, of course, with Qualcomm, seeing it go well beyond anything that we imagined, so that's been excellent. Discussion of impact on the internet. Clearly the mobile access is getting to be the preferred aspect of connecting to the internet. And the blue areas there show parts of the world that now have 3G, that is mobile broadband access to the internet. And you can see it pretty well is covering the world, and those few black spots will be going away. And of course, the process continues on. And if you look at the access as people project ahead, in the order of 3 billion such users in 2015, 3.3 I think was on the previous slide, whereas wired access will be much flatter. The difference between the amount of traffic carried is still somewhat open, although I think you all know that more and more mobile phones, smartphones, etc., are being used for videos, for game playing, those things that also require lots of data. And so the load on the internet, I think, will continue to go up with that increasing slope. A little bit of information about kind of a little background here with Qualcomm. First, on the cellular side, we've gone through several generations. That's still moving ahead. The first generation was analog, FM radio. Second generation, mostly TDMA, some CDMA. That was mostly voice. Third generation, which is the one that's mostly expanding around the world right now, both voice and broadband wireless access. And now another version, 4G, aimed at wider bandwidths and higher peak rates, done with OFDMA or also with multi-carrier 3G. So the technology keeps moving along. We've pretty well accomplished about as much, it appears, as you can in squeezing bits through spectrum per antenna, et cetera. But the network configurations will change to take care of the higher speeds that are coming along and, of course, the greater traffic densities, given that spectrum is somewhat limited. I think there'll be some discussion of use of higher frequencies on these very small radius cells. It's also interesting, of course, the impact of Moore's Law. When we did the first CDMA demonstration back in '89, and that demonstration put together in several months, the mobile required a van to drive it around. We then took the next 2 years reducing the CDMA technology to 3 chips, and then had another demonstration in '91 showing that you now had a handheld phone, and that CDMA that people had said was, well, some said violated the laws of physics, actually could work. And the interesting thing then, as this roughly doubling the number of transistors every 1.5 or 2 years has continued, nowadays we have chips that go in the very thin phones that provide all the power and provide lots of support. So the picture kind of indicates some of the functions that are on a single chip these days, including this 2G, 3G, and 4G capabilities on the same chip, and of course handoffs between them, being able to sense the network and handoff between them. The CPU power is the thing that's also increasing very rapidly. We and others, but we started a project several years ago to squeeze as much computing as we could out of as little energy as we could. And that has resulted in something that we call Snapdragon, and that continues to improve. And so on the bottom of the screen, you can see the different types of capabilities today on the system on chip. That is all those other capabilities, indeed 1, 2, or 3 of these very powerful CPUs. And looking at some of the gray hair in the audience, some of us probably remember being very excited about the 11780 coming out, the DEC-VAX, first DEC-VAX, and that performed about 1 DMIP, which is a measure of computing power. These chips, the single ones, get up to about 6,600 DMIP. So on part of a chip, we now have the computing power that used to be in 1 or 2 racks of equipment. And we're, of course, still continuing down that path. And then adding a lot of other capabilities to it. So very powerful computers in your pocket. That's why there's a very interesting impact on the internet. And that's led to people now having interesting issues over which are the proper operating systems. The main breakthrough, I think, was when Apple came out with the iPhone and showed that people could handle devices that did more than one function. There used to be this big argument about whether smartphones would ever take over or not. But once one had could demonstrate that people indeed could pick up many different apps and make use of them on a single device, that turned out to be a major breakthrough. And now different operating systems picking that up, following along, and of course adding major app stores, many types of applications available. Well, the phone, the smartphone, of course, is a device, and I think that's going to be, again, major use. Again, you notice 5 billion cellular subscribers rapidly switching over to 3G at this point. But of course, we're all aware that there are many other devices. The e-book readers have turned out to be very popular, and those, again, use cellular networks typically to provide information, some Wi-Fi, but some cellular networks to provide the information to the e-book reader, so wherever you are, you can quickly get a download. Tablets, starting with the iPad, again, spreading rapidly to a significant extent, probably going to replace laptops, although that's still to be seen. Again, more powerful operating systems, both those on smartphones and going back to Windows, becoming available on these lower power devices now. Automobiles, trucks, lots of information about navigation, equipment status, so more communications built in, a lot of machine-to-machine type of capabilities. Throwing a picture of a dog there. There's a recent device we've just brought onto the market that both uses GPS to locate the pet finder, and then as needed information as to where that pet is when you want to access it, and even electronic fencing so that if it goes outside of a certain area, you're made aware. Now you might say, why isn't that for the children? I think people are willing to spend a little bit more on the pets right now, but that could change. So we shall see. And then, of course, a whole set of other applications, monitoring pipelines of various kinds, the smart grid effects. There's been some discussion over what will be the communication links both at the home and as it's being generated and transmitted and stored. And I think more and more that's switching over to cellular. So the impact just from smartphones is going to be major, but from all these other applications is going to continue to increase. And another part of that is that the phones themselves, the more and more sensors, both internally, and of course we're becoming aware of those very much, but also external sensors that might be attached to the body, talk over a very short personal area network to the device, maybe powered by body heat or whatever, and providing information. Plus the fact that we have so many of these cell phones around, perhaps with some agreements, the ability to do a lot of sampling of the environment for many different things, again, with these sensors. So making use of major networks of wireless devices that are already out there for other reasons, attach sensors to them, get a lot of other types of information. And I think, again, this will provide further loads on the internet. There's already been one company, at least, that's gone public in the mHealth area, this with a cardiac monitor. And as you can note that it's proved just continuous monitoring to be 3x more effective than previous ways. I think this whole area of mHealth, sensors, being able to monitor people, will increase quality, reduce cost, and I think is probably going to be a major growth area for this particular region, the region around San Diego, between the interest in biomed and biotech and wireless. And that's already begun to start. And so I think this is indeed going to be a very major growth area, and one that, again, we can get a lot of benefits from. Another area that we've all been worrying about for the last several years and have talked about technology and education probably for 3 decades without much of an impact, I think is finally going to now be having a significant impact. This is one experiment that we did back in North Carolina with 4 high schools, providing in a class every student with a smartphone and free internet access 24/7, and providing some additional curricular, homework, other materials. And you can see one of the comments there that with the same teacher, who happened to be a very good teacher, that 100% of the kids in Algebra 1 passed the state exam, 100% of the kids that had the smartphone, whereas only 2/3 of the kids in one of her classes that didn't have the smartphones. That was kind of interesting, and so the question really is, what's happening here? Why is this providing such a difference? And I think it's the 24/7 aspect of it. Kids would go home, try to do a homework problem, run into trouble, parent can't help, then could get on the phones and on the internet, check with other students around the state, get back help. And then very quickly changed over to students that had a good idea of videoing themselves, sending that around. And the last time I was there, about 1.5 years ago, one of the teachers was saying that he provides students the first half of every period for them to present their solutions, and then, well, he's taking care of some students that might need more help, and then moving ahead with the class. I think we're just at the beginning of this. Clearly, the e-texts are coming, and with enough cleverness there, the ability to do branching, to bring videos, to, in some sense, self-test the student as learning, because you know whether it needs more help and he's going for more help, or trying to skip over some material, et cetera. So I think finally we're going to this decade see, and we certainly need it, see a major breakthrough in this whole area. I guess there's going to be a bit of discussion on augmented reality. We've been working and providing kits to developers for developing various apps with augmented reality. I think, again, although it was developed for educational and to support, for example, aircraft maintenance, look up at a bundle of wires, be able to tell which wire is doing everything by looking at it through a device. I think we're most familiar with the yellow lines and other colored lines now on the football field that's augmented. They're not really there, of course. That's why it's so frustrating to go to the stadium. You're much better off staying at home. But since we have Qualcomm Stadium, I should be careful about how I say that. And so there are a lot of different applications, some moderately simple ones where you might have a signpost in a language you can't read, hold your phone up to it, and get that translated for you immediately. Another one, and again, I think wireless devices, given the capabilities, the fact that they can now handle high def, and more of that will be wireless, the interconnection to home entertainment systems. Well, here's one perhaps where you pick a photo that you want, move it onto your TV, and there it is. To do that, the phone had to recognize the whole environment, the TV that you had in mind, and then, of course, handle the transmission of that. And so this whole area of augmented reality, there's various ways of doing it, but with the intelligence that is now in the phone, one can do a lot of the functionality in the phone itself. And so, in particular, even as you move a phone around, keep exactly the location. If you want to introduce then some virtual content, it could be precisely located, and as you move around, see just where that is. And so, as you look to see what's happening here, the camera is doing the scanning, doing some comparisons with information stored. If it doesn't have the right information, going to have to go out over the internet, bring that back, do the positioning and the rendering, and then go back and do this 30 times a second. So the computational load is very high. It's only recently we've had that kind of capability to do that, and again, that capability is now only increasing. So lots of things happening. Now I'm going to try a demonstration here, and I'm not good at this. It's not quite as critical as a few of the demonstrations we've had in the past when probably Qualcomm would have floundered if we didn't kind of work the last bug out in the last second, but here we go. So this is one of the translations. Here's a menu. You see the menu up there first. In Korean, this turns out. This is being done at one of our labs in Korea. And now you can look at it and get it telling you what the food is. I'm not sure that's one I want to eat.
Does it give advice like you don't want to eat this?
Well, it gives you some advice so that you can look and decide for yourself. And
Very clever.
one of the things you may be worried about is the price. And so 542. The interesting one is up here. It's an actual menu, and it says Korean meal, and you look at it. Whoops. And you're getting a huge amount of food. And again, it's the same price, this 540 price. So where are we here? But anyway, it ends up being the same price. So interesting aspects.
Great.
And again, I mentioned that often that some of the initial use really was for instruction. And I will try this with this conference phone. Whoops. I may or may not. Don't ring a volume, I don't want that. Go back. Here you go. See, luckily we're not going to lose the company here. Thank you. Okay, so if any of you have fought with these things called wired phones, much more complicated than cell phones. So you then need the additional information from the cell phone. But this is just to indicate the kind of capability that you can provide, of course, in a much more complicated situation. So it just tells you dial your number, which you would go ahead and do. Dial your first number, and it tells you where you would dial, obviously. Whoops. I'm not getting next very well here. Okay, press more to have additional options on the phone, so that it tells you where that more button is, in yellow if you can see it. Then confirm to add another person, and again tells you which button to push. Again, dial that number, And if you want to, I'm not getting that well. My fingers are too large these days, or my eyes are too poor. Anyway, press confirm again to join everybody together. In any case, the idea being to whatever device or situation or assembling some furniture or whatever, you're able to do that with some additional help. So we're seeing where all this goes. I think one thing that is obviously going to be happening from mobile devices, just more and more load on the internet, more and more capabilities available there, more and more fun. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom DeFonte, and I'm going to do something kind of on the other end of the spectrum. We work with very much the same kind of technology, except we do it 100 times larger. And so we're going to show you, to start, some 4K digital cinema. 4K is 4 times HD. It's being streamed from Keio University in Japan at 500 megabits a second. So go ahead with that, Hector. And I'll tell you, we're on a very tight schedule, so I'll tell you ahead of time, is that we shot this in Prague, and on a day in which they happen to have this train running. And, but after we shot it, we lost the audio. We very carefully took the audio and lost it. So the audio is actually reconstructed. Now, I usually tell this after the thing, but listen to it because the audio is faked. Anytime, yeah. And so that actually inspired us to do a whole worldwide project called the Cinegrid Exchange to preserve this material, to copy it over and over and over again and have automated iRod software that copies it. Part of the reason we did this was because we wanted students to be able to work with this medium. You can actually edit this on your Mac. We wanted students to be able to edit this, edit materials like this, add sound to it, you know. The problem was you can't get material like this out of Hollywood. They just won't give it to you. You know, so we went out and shot it ourselves. This was shot with a digital camera, so it's not a film camera. By the way, last night we talked about what's the future of the internet. In my opinion, that the future of the internet is whatever it is that simulates it next. Okay, back to the slides. Now, for those of you astute observers of this, this is 24 frames per second. This is what movie people like to do. They like the fact that when you move things across the screen, it strobes. So even though we have the resolution there to read all the numbers on the side of the train, you can't read them because they're strobing. So video people have a solution to that. They do it at higher speed, and I'll show you that in a minute. We have been developing this 4K technology as part of elaborate video conferencing, because if you want to have people and data sent, you either have to do it at very high bandwidth, so you can read things like the newspaper here, should you want to, or you have to separate them. And so we do both. We do this 4K high-res JPEG 2000 encoding, and we also separate things, and I'll show you that in a minute. So as part of the separation idea, we have built these systems called optoportables, and you can actually see one down the hall in the gallery that is communicating as part of this UCSD Community Stations project that allows people in the Casa Familiar Community Center, the South Metro Career Center in South San Diego, and us in UCSD to work together on problems without anybody having to move anywhere. So it's a real elaborate data and people teleconferencing telecommunications system. I invite you to go see it. and I could talk about it for hours. We use the same system to do very elaborate things like telecollaboration for audio post-production that we've done in this auditorium with Skywalker Sound, Disney, Lucasfilm, and other people. We're very deeply concerned about keeping the high-value movie industry jobs in California by allowing the smart people to live here and to telecommunicate with their people in Singapore, Arizona, other places that provide a better tax basis for movie production. And here was an example going all the way to Prague, where they have a huge movie-making facility. It involves, when people are making movies, they want to see things in full quality. So, and to do this, over the years, we built a network, which is overlaid on a network called Glyph, and the Cinegrid network, and it connects all of these institutions around the world that actively use 10 gigabit networks in order to create this world of digital cinema, both archiving and editing and evaluation. We don't do distribution. That's somebody else's problem. Here's an example of a network that we set up on as part of that with VLANs, for those of you know what Layer 2 networking is about, to create a demonstration for Disney and their Frank G. Wells Auditorium, linking several of the universities and people who make materials for the movie studios. This is now being commercialized and turned into a product that people in Hollywood and Northern California and so on can buy that is outside of the typical telco offerings. It took us years to be able to do this and prove to people that it was functional, and literally to have people stop laughing at us about it. So, because it's outside of the normal Layer 3 networking. So I'm going to show you now 60p TV. So this is 4K 60p. Go ahead, Hector, as soon as you can. And the idea here is to show that once we go up to 60p, there is much less motion artifact. Now this involves a whole lot more bandwidth. So this is coming from NTT Yokosuka Labs in Tokyo, near Tokyo, or near Yokohama. And it is, so this is coming at about a gigabit a second compressed. Uncompressed, this would be about 12 gigabits a second. So it's a 12 to 1 compression. JPEG 2000, you really can't tell, the compression. I mean, I can't anyway. You'll notice there's still some motion artifacts when things are moving really fast. Clearly, you want to go to something like 240 hertz, but the technology does not support that yet. I'm sure that all of those ads are stuck in there by digitally. You can see some of them moving along. Okay, so let's go on. We can stop that and go back to slides, thanks. Okay, so if you see, this is our pyramid, and the funny thing about this pyramid is that as we go up from HD to movie HD, stereo HD, like Avatar, full digital cinema at 4K, stereo 4K, and then you can go, there's actually people doing 8K now, but the thing that we've blown off the top of the pyramid with are our tile displays, which we have in this building and have built for other people around the world. So here we're talking about hundreds of megapixels, and the justification there is that scientists want to see things at greater detail than people are capable of capturing with cameras alone, or at least conventional cameras. So the first big one of these we built was at the KAUST University in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, and it's 40 megapixels. In the room right next door on the other side of this wall, we're building a 100 megapixel one, and it's got unique, and it's all going to be on wheels, so we can move it around and do different configurations as tests. So if you want to poke in and see that under construction, just corner me. Now, motivating some of this is I went to Luxor, Egypt, right after the revolution in April, and took pictures with this gizmo, which is called a cave cam. It allows us to take fully surround images. Now, these are half gigapixel images. This happens to be a QuickTime, relatively low resolution QuickTime movie. But you see, it really does go all the way up and all the way down. I'm trying to do this slowly, so Everybody is enjoying it. These are half gigapixel per eye. And so we use these in virtual reality and create images in virtual reality in stereo. It's the first case of really bringing photography into the virtual reality business. And we do this in the Star Cave, which is the next room after this one, the second room down. Now, one of the things that this motivates, okay, so now we have still photography in virtual reality. And what happens is that you go and look at something like this inside the tomb in Luxor, and you kind of go around and look, and you can see the ceiling and so on. But what happens is that you come over to a place like this, and you say, ah, there's another room. I want to go in that room. Well, I can't go in the room because what I've got is a gigapixel worth of pixels mapped onto a sphere, and I can't go in there. I want to go in there. So how do we do that? Well, one way, of course, is take a lot of images, kind of like conventional animation where you move the camera and take images, you interpolate between them. That's the kind of the brute force way. In order to do that, we'd have to have 200 gigabits a second from our servers, and we are actually going to implement that this year as a test to essentially wear out the supercomputer system as a test and all the networking. But the thing that you really want to do is take this kind of information and merge it with this kind of information. So this is LiDAR information. And so this gives you distance and point structure. Here we're looking at, well over 1.5 billion points in real time. So we get plenty of geometry out of this, and we can zoom around it all we want, but it looks kind of grainy. So what we want to do is merge these two technologies, get photographic realism merged with the LiDAR. And we're at the cusp of doing that this year. So next time you come here, you'll see these things all merged up. And so I just want to tell you that there is, essentially no end to what we need in order to do to simulate reality, or to actually, in this case, record reality and play it back. And so don't stop thinking with cell phones. Keep your minds open. Keep those bits flowing. Okay, so I just want to thank you very much to my sponsors, and. Thank you.
Well, the theory is that I have a set of slides. I'm Vince Cerf, and I'm not going to compete with the first two presentations. Those are just so good that I should sit down and let you guys come back up again and keep going. One thing I can tell you is that if the internet's going to survive, it's going to have to follow Darwin's principle. And that principle reads approximately adapt or die. And so I hope it adapts. You've already seen, those of you who've been around for a while, have seen the internet go from a 50 kilobit per second backbone to a 50 gigabit or more per second backbone. The scale has grown also by a factor of 1 million or more. If I could have the next slide, please. Or do I have to push a button to make this happen, or are you guys controlling the slides up there?
There's a keyboard in front.
There, got it. Oh, it's the space bar. All right. Let's go over here. So this is what the internet looked like in 1999. It looks this way in 2011, too. What this is an image that was generated by looking at the global routing tables and giving a different color to each one of the autonomous systems that's in the net. And of course, there's a lot of stuff, and it's compressed, and colors get reused and everything else. But the point here is that this is a highly distributed system. There is no central control. There is no central authority, not counting ICANN, which is allocating address space and domain names. But other than that, operationally, this is a fully distributed system. And the important part is it's operated by independent entities. So the implication of that is that if there's going to be any change in the net, it is going to be decisions that are based on decisions that are made independently by parties who make their choices of hardware and software, when to upgrade and everything else, more or less independently, often on the basis of economics or business conditions or other kinds of considerations. So anything that happens to the net to make it evolve is going to happen in a very distributed way. My numbers are not very different from Irwin's numbers. There are over 800 million machines that are visible on the internet in the public space. Now, that doesn't mean that there are only 800 million machines on the net. Many of them are hiding behind firewalls. A lot of them are on only episodically, like laptops and desktops and mobiles, although increasingly mobiles are on for longer periods of time than simply making phone calls, as we all know. There are an estimated 2 billion users on the internet, probably more. Many times you find people sharing equipment. Often in the developing world, you'll find internet cafes where the same piece of equipment is used by 30 or 40 people in the course of a day. The 5 billion mobiles that are in use are, many of them are internet capable, not all of them, and I don't know what the statistics are. Erwin, I've been guessing 15 to 20% of the mobiles are internet capable. Do you think that's in the right range, or is it? It's growing rapidly. So to say nothing, of course, the speeds at which these devices get access to the net. There are only on the order of 1 billion or maybe even 1.5 billion PCs, so it's all clear that the mobiles have overtaken every other internet-enabled device. One thing I'd like to point out about the power of mobiles and internet together is that because the mobile gives you literally mobile access, tetherless access, and it has a fair amount of computing power, it turns itself into an information window, and the consequence of that is that you exercise and get access to all the information that's out on the internet through this mobile device. And so the value of the two resources is vastly enhanced by the fact that you can access the information that's out on the net, activate the computing power, and upload into it more information. In fact, anyone who thinks that we have any privacy anymore should think twice, because everyone's walking around with a video camera, an audio recorder, et cetera, and all of which can be put up on the net and discovered quite readily. Now, just like Erwin, I've noticed there are an awful lot of interesting devices that have shown up on the net, including things like an internet-enabled surfboard. There's some guy in the Netherlands who must have been sitting out on the water waiting for the next wave, thinking, you know, if I had a laptop and my surfboard, I could be surfing the internet while I'm waiting to get out on the water. So he built this thing, and he put a Wi-Fi server on at the rescue shack back on the beach, and he sells this as a product. So if you had in mind surfing the net while you're out on the water, this is the thing for you. I want to come back to these devices because it turns out that this proliferation of things, as Erwin pointed out, increases the total number of addressable devices that need to be addressed. And the consequence of that is a real strain on the internet. When Bob Kahn and I were doing the original work in 1973, and then later when I was at DARPA in 1977, this question came up, well, how much address space should we allocate to the internet? Well, when we were first doing the design work, we thought, well, it's an experiment. Let's see, a national scale network is expensive. Maybe there could be 2 per country, and there were on the order of 120 countries back then. So we said, you know, 8 bits ought to be enough for 256 networks, and then the other 24 bits would be adequate to point to various computers that were on those national scale networks. And that question came up again in 1976. There was a big argument for over a year. Some people wanted variable length addressing, but the programmers hated that idea because that meant that you would have to use up computer cycles to find the rest of the fields in the packet if the address space was variable, and they came at the front of the packet. So we threw that idea out. Some people said, how about 128 bits of address space? And remember, this is 1977. We have barely got 3 networks talking to each other, the packet satellite net, the packet radio net, and the ARPANET. And so I'm sitting here thinking, let's see, 2 to the 128, there's 340 trillion addresses. That didn't pass the red face test. I couldn't figure out how could I justify that much address space for an experiment. So we stuck with 32, which lasted until February of this year. And at this point, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, which is part of ICANN, actually exhausted all of its allocable IPv4 address space. So ICANN doesn't have any more left. The 5 regional Internet registries are still allocating their final allocations, although the Asia-Pac group ran out in April. So there isn't any more IPv4, freely available IPv4 address space in Asia-Pac. The consequence of this, of course, is fairly significant because now there are people looking at their address space that they haven't used, and they're selling it. And this has all kinds of not so good ramifications, because when you start breaking up pieces of address space and then trying to hand it out, it's useless unless that address block is in somebody's routing table. If it's not in the routing table in the routers, then nobody can find it. So there's no point in trying to make use of an address that is not available for routing. So the biggest, most serious problem that I see right now is the introduction of a larger address space and coping with the routing that's going to be needed, the computations for connectivity in such a large address space. Well, IP version 6 was standardized in 1996, and there has been a very, very slow process of trying to get this implemented. There was a major demonstration of IPv6 on a worldwide basis on June 8th, when many of us, including Google and others, turned on our IPv6 capabilities, and the ISPs that had implemented it also turned that on. We're going to do a week's worth of IPv6 demonstration and testing, probably in March or April of next year. So we're hoping that people will get the point that instead of putting in network address translation boxes, which are an abomination when it comes to end-to-end security and all kinds of other things, that we'll get IPv6 implemented so we can accommodate all the devices that are increasingly online all the time. Some of those are sensor networks, and I'd like to come back to that. Smart grid, Irwin mentioned, this is a program of intelligent devices that can respond to advice. For example, we're reaching a peak load in power demand. If you don't need to use the water heater now, why don't you not run the electrical power? Don't run the water heater until 20 minutes from now, and save yourself from having to pay peak load pricing. Having devices that are smart enough to respond to that kind of demand can be useful. The Smart Grid Interoperability Panel has agreed to use IP version 6 as the addressing structure for these smart grid devices. Mobiles, we've talked a lot about, and I would endorse all the things that Irwin mentioned. And finally, just more generally, there are going to be many, many programmable network devices around. In fact, here's one example. This is a commercial sensor network made by a company called ArchRock, which was acquired by Cisco not too many months ago. I installed a 12-node IPv6 6-low-pan radio-based network in the house. These little devices not only are sampling temperature and humidity and light levels, but they're also forwarding packets around for each other. So it's a mobile ad hoc network. It's not mobile. The devices are essentially fixed, but it calculates a network, and it maintains that network by alternate routing if necessary. So every 5 minutes, it's collecting information about the status of the house. This is an example of the kind of report that comes back. There's actually a lot more data that comes. It tells you what the battery power left is in each one of the devices, and how many packets have been passed through, and how many have been lost and retransmitted. So this is what I get in summary. Of course, the most important piece of information is at the bottom there. It's at the wine cellar, because we have to make sure that's below 60 degrees Fahrenheit and preferably above about 50% humidity so the corks don't dry out. And when it turns out that we break through that 60-degree Fahrenheit barrier, I get an SMS on my mobile warning me that you just breached the temperature. It actually happened to me. I was at Argonne National Laboratory for a 3-day meeting, and just as I'm walking into the building, the mobile goes off. It's the wine cellar calling. And I just blasted through the 60-degree barrier. My wife is away for 2 weeks, so every 5 minutes for the next 3 days, I got a message saying your wine is warming up. How come my screen just went blank? I can't see anything down here, and so that means I have to look back there. Or I have to hit the screen? Yeah, how hard? Oh, okay, so if I want to go back, there. All right, so a friend of mine said, you can tell when somebody goes into the wine cellar when you're away because you can see the light turning on, but you don't know what they did there. So we thought, okay, maybe we should put RFID chips on each bottle. And then we can do an instantaneous inventory to find out if any bottles have left the wine cellar while you were away. And we were debugging this idea, and he pointed out that you could go into the wine cellar and drink the bottle, drink the wine and leave the bottle, in which case that, there's a bug. So now we have to put sensors in the corks. And if we're going to do that, we might as well sample the esters that make the wine taste good. And then before you open the bottle, you interrogate the cork. And, if it turns out that that's the bottle that got up to 90 degrees because the cooling system failed, that's the bottle you give to somebody who doesn't know the difference. So this is a very practical kind of thing to have around the house. Now, remember, I'm making up these things as we go along, and then I find out there is a product that has an RFID-enabled wine rack, and it's even more interesting. It's fully internet capable. And you can interrogate it. For example, you can say, first of all, you can say, I'm having lamb chops for dinner. What kind of wine should I have? And it suggests Syrah or something like that. And then you can tell the wine rack to light up the bottles that are Syrah, or you can only the ones that are from 2006. So this is actually a fairly fancy piece of equipment. And I would suggest to you that we're going to have many, many more of these things as time goes on. So the point I want to make here is that there's this incredibly large universe of devices that we're going to have on the net, and we have to manage them and we have to accommodate them somehow in the system. We will have taken all the real objects in the world, and having internet enabled them, they become parts of the virtual universe that the internet itself creates. That creates opportunities for people to introduce third-party management. For example, if all of your entertainment equipment is on the net, then somebody else can say, okay, I will take care of downloading the movies that you want, the music that you want to listen to. I'll make sure it gets onto your iPods, your iPads, the things in the car, the DVRs at home. I will schedule all that stuff. And oh, by the way, as long as I can do that, I can manage the security in the house, manage the HVAC. All of these devices, once they become visible in the internet environment, not only can be managed, but by third parties. So we create new opportunities for businesses to be invented. In fact, one thing that has occurred to me is that an internet-based 911 would be a lot more effective than today's 911, which is bound only to telephone numbers, and then you look up in the table to see where that telephone number is supposed to be. Imagine, just for the sake of argument, first of all, mobiles, which have to be able to report their location in order for 911 to be useful. But imagine you're in a hotel, you go into the hotel room is announcing with a radio signal what room number you're in. So if you hit 911 on your mobile or your laptop, it now knows, because the room told it, where you are. And so the 911 guys get information, you're in room 342 at this address, as opposed to you're simply at that address and they have to figure out where the hell did the 911 call come from. So this notion of augmenting capability by bringing more and more information to bear strikes me as a very powerful thing. So more generally, you could be asking, where's my stuff? And as long as you have devices that are capable of reporting their location, or alternatively, imagine you have a device with an RFID chip in it, and your mobile has an RFID sensor. And what it's doing is constantly checking to see whether it can still hear that device. And as soon as it can't hear it anymore, it records where it was at the time that it stopped hearing where that thing. So your keys are over here because that was the last time your mobile could hear them, or your glasses or your briefcase or what have you. And so you can go to Google Maps and say, where's my stuff? And basically it should be able to tell you. So I'm thinking, what can we do with all those devices that I showed you pictures of before, or that Erwin showed pictures of? So imagine you have an internet-enabled refrigerator. And, what can you do with that? Well, it has a nice liquid crystal display, touch sensitive. And suppose it has an RFID system inside, so it can tell what's inside the refrigerator. So while you're away working, it's surfing the internet trying to find recipes that you could make with what it knows it has inside. And when you come home, you see these nice recipes for things to make for dinner. Then let's see, what else could you do? Oh, well, the Japanese have invented an internet-enabled bathroom scale. And so when you get on the scale, it figures out which family member you are based on your weight, and it transmits that data to the doctor. It becomes part of your medical record. Of course, the refrigerator is on the same network. So, when you come home, you see diet recipes, or maybe it just refuses to open. This is bad. And I don't know about you, but I'm forever losing my socks. So I'd like to have something embedded in the sock, an RFID chip, so that when when I can't find the sock, you send an SNMP broadcast around the house, and you get back, hi, I'm sock number 144L, and I'm under the sofa in the living room. So one interesting thing that there's internet-enabled picture frames, and I bet a lot of you have those, but the way they work is that they typically log in at some frequency once every 24 hours and then download images that you've instructed it to get. And I'm thinking, this is wonderful for the grandparents. They get to see what the grandchildren are doing. You use your mobile cameras to upload things to the web, and the web is downloaded onto the picture frame. Of course, if access control should be a real issue here, because if the web server that has the images on it that you're downloading into the picture frame gets hacked, then the grandparents may see pictures that they hope are not of the grandchildren. So strong authentication turns out to be a really important element in this vastly increasing universe of devices. Now, I used to tell people as a joke that someday there would be an internet-enabled light bulb. Well, now there's an internet-enabled light bulb. It's an LED bulb. It costs about $15. It probably lasts about 15 years, doesn't use very much power, and it has an RF IPv6 transceiver in it so that you can detect the state of the light bulb and control the light bulb remotely. I'm sure only a geek would want to do that, but eventually a lot of this stuff will fall into the category of internet-capable and therefore manageable stuff. So I'll stop there and say that the biggest and toughest problem for me is not the high speed on the net, but it's just the scale of the system as we enable every light bulb and light switch and article of clothing that we wear. Thank you.
I think my wife would say I need an RFID on my head because if it wasn't attached to my body, I would lose it. So, but it's quite an honor to be in this room with the people who founded and keep on pushing the limits of what the internet can do and the sensors that are attached to it. It's okay about it. But one thing that I hope to explore is just, what we could do if those sensors were really focusing on just the human aspects of what we can do as a network. Looking back into the past, as Ramesh mentioned, I had to search deep into my soul and find my childhood here with Where's Waldo. This is a challenging task to identify where's Waldo in this image. I mean, that's the whole point of the program, and it's something that's very human and that we can sort of look for it, but it's also something that you could automate. I mean, if you told a computer vision algorithm to look for exactly that guy, you'd be able to fairly quickly sift him out of that image and identify him up in that upper left-hand quadrant. So it's object recognition. We can kind of start to automate it. But when you don't really know what you're looking for, there's nuances about Waldo. Like, let's say if you wanted to say, is Waldo happy? It might be a little bit more difficult for a computer to define. I mean, I can tell by that big smile, but maybe it's a little more difficult to automate. Here's another image that was quite compelling. It went viral on the internet. And if you asked a computer vision algorithm to look for the interest point, maybe you would look at that center object because it's got. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's quite a brave photographer to take this photo. But the reason why I'm showing this is not to empathize with the fear that you should feel if that golf ball is flying at your face, but to realize that even though you might be able to automate looking for Waldo, you can't predict that when this thing went online, that what everybody else would say was the most compelling thing about this image was that guy. I mean, he showed up everywhere. He was, there's T-shirts now with this guy's face on it, cigar guy. So this is just one aspect of humanity, visual perception that is tough to scale up, right? I mean, we can sort of process things on computer-based models, but when you're not sure about what you're looking for, it's hard to scale it up. Finding lots of data and going through all this data is very tedious. So what do? You need a human brain. Maybe you need many human brains connected over the internet, right? Maybe you can find a way in which we can engage the social aspects of the internet and take all the sensors of these brains and focus them around singular problems, like challenges. This is the idea of crowdsourcing, right? So I had the honor of being a part of this project that had a lot of challenging data analysis to it. You know, I decided at one point in my life that it was my absolute mission to go to Mongolia and look for the tomb of Genghis Khan. And how would you do that, right? So you'd start off with satellite images, and you'd try to survey the entire area, and then you'd go down and find anomaly points, and you'd survey those with aerial drones, and then you'd go down even further, you'd go on the ground, and you'd look with geophysics, like ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and electromagnetic induction, and try to find this tomb. Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's what the university is for, right? You gotta go crazy. So what we ended up doing was being able to collect over 85,000 little bite-sized maps of ultra-high-resolution 0.5-meter GOI-1 satellite imagery. They donated this to us, the GOI Foundation. They actually positioned their satellite on both sides of this mountain that we were on to take a 3D image, you know, as a stereo image of the mountain in ultra-high resolution so that we could see where we were from a bird's eye view. But how do you go through all that data? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, even with the best graduate students and the most dedicated undergraduate students, it would take a lifetime and a lot of pizza and a lot of beer and everything like that. But you wouldn't be able to get those nuances in high detail. These are the types of images that we're looking at. You know, we're looking at a vast area where in high detail you can make out that there's anomalies, but how could I predict that the anomaly on the right would define a modern structure versus the anomaly on the left, or those two anomalies, those two little dots there might be something more ancient, something that we don't quite know. I mean, I'm looking for a needle in a haystack when I have no idea what the needle looks like at all, right? So, well, I mean, we can all empathize. We can tell that that looks kind of unique, but we're only in a room for an hour a day together, and it'd be hard to enlist you guys for the rest of this week to sift through a bunch of images. So what we did was we created a web portal. We took that network and we used it to funnel a bunch of brain power into one challenge. So that portal is still up right now at exploration.nationalgeographic.com. And the whole point of this was that you could enable people to do very simple tasks, to label things like ancient structures, roads, rivers, modern structures. And when they finished doing these tasks, when an individual would finish, they would press they were done, and they would see the results of everybody who had been there before them. And from this, they'd start to get this collective understanding of what they're supposed to look for, right? I mean, they're just understanding that, okay, yeah, I'm right. I get a verification. And if they were wrong, it would filter out into the noise because it wouldn't cluster around these little points. The next level would be to try to give a ranking system or give some incentives to try to be as close to those clusters as possible. And we're working on that now. We put that website online. We started transmitting it out to the world, and our idea was that we would get all the data, it would transmit via a satellite link up to us in the field, and then we'd go explore those areas and blog back in real time and tell people what they saw so that they would get this feedback loop where they would get confirmation from themselves, from the group, and then confirmation from us on the ground saying, yes, they were right, they found a tomb, or no, you just found a group of sheep, or you know, something like this. And that was our idea. So we put it online. And what you're about to see is the time sequence of just a small portion of the data points going onto our map. Let's see here. So one by one, we started to see people showing up, you know, across all parts of the globe. And in the course of about 6 months, we reached over 1.8 million human contributions. Now, as they're flowing on, the reds are the roads, the blues are the rivers, yellow dots are representing ancient structures, and while it looks like a cacophony of noise, you start to see structures forming. You can see the roads start to show up. See those red lines where the roads are showing up? You can see the river starting to get mapped with the blue markers, we're starting to actually map this as a collaborative project. And each one of those points is an individual human isolated in front of a computer, just pressing, I think that looks like a road, a river, or an anomaly. When you look at some areas in a little greater detail, you can see here that with the roads, they get marked up, and you start to see these little clusters, those little yellow cluster dots right there on the bottom right-hand side. Those clusters we can measure. We can measure how many times an image was seen, and we can measure how dense the clusters created around that image are, and we can rank them in order of priority. So these are the clusters I'm talking about. So when you see something like that, you get excited, and you can tell that underneath there's something weird. You don't really know what to look for, so you pack up your goats and you go into the field. And you have horses and everything else. And a lot of the members of this team, in fact, all of them, were UCSD graduate engineering students, mostly in wireless communications. And then they got to learn how to ride horses and eat goats all day long, over and over and over again. And trust me, nobody will eat goat for a month straight. It gets really, really disgusting after a while. But I digress. So here we go. We go into the field, and we have a fleet of 10 huge military trucks and 15 horses and 3 drones and a lot of equipment. And we start hiking the whole region. I mean, this is a massive, expansive 6,000 square kilometer area that we're surveying. And we're looking for where those points had identified small anomalies. And we can start to find that, yes, sometimes there are these little more modern structures, and sometimes these larger features, you can really see that on the ground, there are these ancient hierixers, this 3,000-year-old Bronze Age tomb. Even smaller features, even tiny little dots like this would show up as clusters, and we'd come on to the site, and we'd see these what they're called deer stones, these ancient monoliths. We actually hacked open an iPad and had it be able to run Google Earth underneath it using our satellite images, and then every day we would download all of our human points onto these iPads, and we'd walk around on our iPad in Mongolia looking at where people had told us to go, and we'd be able to tag and give contributions back to that whole feedback loop. And fly these drones in the air, and we'd see that what people had identified in high detail actually sometimes marked many, many tombs, surrounded around a single cluster. So over the course of a single month in the field, we engaged 1.8 million human contributions. I mean, this is thousands of man-hours. And we found over 55 burial mounds that spanned an entire age of over 3,000 years of human heritage. And we found some very, very interesting things that are going to be described in a documentary film on the National Geographic Channel in November. Some very exciting things, right? That can't show slides for yet, but it'll be very cool to see. So we celebrated, right? We celebrated after that with a bit of Mongolian wrestling, a little bit of horse riding, and of course a new way of Mongolian soccer. It's very fun. But the next steps are, where do we take this? Where do we take this information? Now we've got all these human tags identifying what's unique, what's weird. So one thing that we just recently received was the NSF EAGER grant to be able to try to train some supervised learning algorithms based off of these human inputs in real time, and do maybe even some of this computer vision. We've got an NSF Rapid grant to try to do crowdsourcing to look at disaster areas and understand and map out massive disaster regions so that we can understand, for example, in this case, how building structures might act as almost like linebackers in mitigating tsunami wave run-up. The group that did this even started a little company that has gone out and been able to work with the World Bank, with National Geographic, with relief organizations to try to find ways in which we can take the power of the crowd and apply it to all sorts of projects. And so really what we've just shown is that all you need is a crowd, which we have on the internet now, interconnect them around a single problem, and then go out and try to solve that problem in this big feedback loop. And we need data, we need a crowd, and we need a problem. So this could be anything. It could be bee counting, it could be looking for illegal shipping containers or fishing boats. It could be something a little closer to home, trying to track wildfires as they're occurring in real time. All you really need is this data and this problem to solve. But as we're seeing across the evolution of the internet is that we can start to touch upon the idea of crowd-generated data, crowd-defined problems. So maybe the question is not whether or not the internet will survive, but more, will it evolve into a collective consciousness of human intention? So that's my talk. Thank you very much.
So we have time for questions. We hope we have stimulated you. Please, could I ask the panelists to get on stage? Martha.
Well,
Went, you might want to repeat the question.
Yeah. One possible response to that is that you shouldn't have to. Second, at some point, you ought to be able to have a discussion by saying what it is you want to have happen. We're sort of edging in this direction at Google in a very, very limited way. Many of you will have noticed that with Android phones and with other Google-enabled applications that there's a place to speak instead of type. Virtually any place where you could type something, you should be able to speak something. And we try to interpret what you said. We're not perfect at that, but over the past 40 years or so, speech recognition has improved dramatically over time. This also has another rather interesting characteristic to it. If you happen to be illiterate, I'm sure you're not, but there are people who are illiterate, literally, and who could, however, make use of the contents of the net if they could talk to it and get answers back. Now, they might not be able to read the answers, but the answers could be read to them. Images could be displayed, maps could be shown. So that's not a complete answer to your question, but what I hope for, if not the consciousness that you were talking about, Albert, is at least the ability to have a conversation. So when you're searching for something in our world, the only clue we have right now is the words that you put into the search bar, plus maybe some contextual information. What would be nice is to be able to say something about what it was you were trying to accomplish, as opposed to simply getting a clue that you're interested in anything that has these terms in it. And maybe that's the next step.
Perhaps more to the point, do you know anybody who still has a VCR?
I'm sorry, Ramesh, I had a question for Albert. It occurred to me watching, it was a wonderful presentation, is that it's not crowdsourcing, it's crowd computing. Is that literally what, instead of cloud computing, you've done crowd computing because you're using the wetware in such quantity.
There you go, register that.
From software to wetware, huh?
Yeah, I have to register that right away. No, and I'm definitely not the first to approach this. There's been other projects in the past that I've done that have sparked upon this. In fact, the first inspiration I had to even think about this was a project that was looking for Steve Fawcett using using Amazon Turk. So this is or SETI at home, which had which connected a bunch of different computers together to process. And so the interesting thing is that our brains are the best processors so far right now still, right? And now we've connected all these brains together on the internet. We might as well try to focus them into a single parallel problem.
And maybe something constructive too, which would be nice. Didn't DARPA do an experiment once where they released a bunch of red balloons and they wanted to find out how quickly it would take people to find them? And it seemed that it was very, very fast. I mean, it was a few hours or something, lots and lots of people looking for these things.
Absolutely. In fact, there's one of the leading research scientists in that project is now a
postdoc here.
Yeah, postdoc here in the computer science department, and I've had some. He's an incredible guy, and so what they did is just another example of how rapidly we can solve problems together.
Let me pick up on your literacy aspect. One of the projects we have going is helping fishermen. So information set over cell phones, obviously about the weather, but also about the fish, which kinds are biting and where, and perhaps most importantly, what will they get paid if they land in different ports, so you get rid of some of the middleman issues. Mm-hmm. And that's turned out, it's now become a commercial service throughout India, going down to South America. But one of the things I was hoping is that because most of the fishermen are illiterate, that they're getting some information from hearing it, but are unable to get anything by looking at the diagrams and reading things. And so the hope is that rather than helping them with only hearing things, that this will spur some additional literacy and, of course, hopefully be taught over the phone.
So interestingly enough, captioning has done that. You see people who are watching captioned television, and often it's not just somebody who is deaf like I am, but somebody for whom English was a second language, and the caption feedback is actually reinforcing learning of the language.
More questions from the audience? We have a microphone.
Thanks. This is directed towards Albert. Is there a danger that there's an emerging disconnect between creativity in terms of coming up with new applications such as those you've talked about today, and real-world economics? So, a lot of the advances in technology over the internet in particular have been driven by large companies, Qualcomm, Google, Apple, and their sole target is to generate profit. Now you're coming up with applications where you're relying on individuals using hundreds of billions of dollars of prior investment to come up with solutions to problems that generate almost no profit. An example would be if someone came up and said that every person on the planet has to cook for their neighbor, once a week. Again, that's sort of crowdsourcing. But as individuals, do you think there'll be a time when suddenly people realize that this economic output cannot be generated at no cost?
Cannot be generated?
Cannot be generated, yeah, at no cost. It's almost like a freebie type culture, if that makes sense.
Well, there's a lot of unique ways in which to get people to do things other than altruism and by paying. You can trick people into participating as well. There's a project, there's a research professor at CMU, Louis Van Ong, who created these CAPTCHAs, right? And so the CAPTCHA project basically said that if you want to enter into your website, you had to basically decode a string of words that they had taken a photograph of. And so you'd type in this password. You're forced to do it, right? And in effect, what he was doing was digitizing huge libraries of books. Getting humans to do that by tricking them into doing it. Not tricking them, but just sort of, holding their email hostage almost, right? And so there's lots of different ways of getting people to participate, but there's another system out there. Amazon is working on Amazon Turk, where you can get people to make little contributions for a penny at a time. And so we're finding that people will contribute small amounts of time or even big amounts of time just for fun or because they have to or out of altruism. And the creativity aspect of this is that creativity isn't held back by, in my mind, by economic drivers. In fact, I think it's fueled by economic drivers. So if we can find ways in which we incentivize people to participate, however it is, the creativity that'll come out of those incentivizations, that's where things grow on their own. I mean, that's where they gain massive entropy. So that I think that there's a lot of opportunity in micro contributions, both financed or out of just funology, I guess is the other idea. So.
Funology. So actually, if I could, Ramesh, I have a question. Albert brings up economics and as a potential driver. Let me flip this around for just a second. Sometimes when things get cheap enough, when costs come down far enough, you're in a different kind of qualitative regime. And I was struck by this thought, Erwin, when you were showing the difference between the CDMA van and the 0.28 nanometer chipsets that use very little power and fit in your hand. So sometimes economics, big changes in economics enable some very major differences and changes. And I'm wondering whether we could anticipate any major changes in economics that could have an impact. An example of this is the difference between printing things on paper and distributing them physically and distributing things digitally. The cost of digital distribution, despite the infrastructure that has to be paid for, is markedly less per copy than having to print things, and that's why newspapers and magazines are having some economic problems, because it's an expensive process now, even though it once was the cheapest way to get a large amount of information in front of many people. Are there any other economic changes that you can anticipate that might make big differences?
So I anticipate my telecommunications bill to go up and up and up and up and up and up. It has gone up. It's now considerably more than my entire other combined utility bills, the electric, the gas, water, here in San Diego. So it's just going to go up and up and up. So that's my economic impact statement.
Erwin, can you do something about that?
The cost of cellular costs keep coming down and down and down, but that's,
Use more and more and more.
but then you get hopefully enough income to keep everybody, all the networks going. Now, one of the interesting other questions is going to similarly be this question of networks of senses, and so whether people are going to be willing to let some of their personal device and airtime be used to send out information, some measurements from where they are. And that may take some very minor incentives, a little bit more free time or something of that sort. But I think we're going to be, there's been some early experiments. I think we'll be seeing more of that.
Tom, you got to stop streaming 4K movies through your internet then.
Andy, you have a question. Please wait for the microphone just a second.
Along the lines of what,
Andy, yeah.
along the lines of what Vint and others have said, whoever hears of the digital divide these days? A decade ago, it was the biggest issue around. And the reason, I gather, is because with Moore's Law, the smartphone, economies of scale, and the subsidies that the carriers provide for smartphones as well. The costs, along the lines of what you just said, the costs have come down so much that everyone has access to the internet effectively.
That's not quite right in the sense that there are many families. Broadband is widely available, but there's still many families that don't have it. One of the things that we ran into with the this teaching experiment I mentioned, where we gave smartphones, is that many of the families didn't have the capability. So having the smartphone was useful for the whole family. But in trying to expand that program, the FCC has just provided some additional funding so that for students to spread this approach to many schools as an experiment, and to allow the school districts to be able to provide monies to the families so that they can pay for the internet service. So it still is a problem, but much better.
But that was 3 years ago.
No, that's just happened. The FCC just set aside that money.
3 years from now,
Oh,
Yeah,
it may have.
it's moving in the right direction.
I want to reinforce Andy's point, because he's right. I remember hearing people say, oh my God, the digital divide, the developed world was going to accelerate at the speed of light and the rest of the world wouldn't be able to catch up. And economics really made a big difference. And I always felt then, and I still feel now, that the trends are with us to close that digital divide, because the cost of these things should come down. Except maybe the comm bill. Now, I do wonder about that, communications. It's stunning to see how much people are willing to pay to get access to mobile communication, significant fractions of their monthly income, because it's so valuable. It really is quite stunning.
So maybe we have time for one more question from the audience back there.
Yes, hello, my name is David, and to the topic of will he survive, I didn't hear anybody speak about like security. Will that be an issue in terms of surviving with cybersecurity, such a...
Who wants to take that question?
I didn't understand
Wait.
the question.
Security.
Okay, so, well, this is a big deal. My first observation, of course, is that if we had had the possibility of putting more security in the internet to begin with, we would have. And in fact, an effort began in 1975 to do just that. with the National Security Agency. I was still at Stanford, but unfortunately, everything we used at that time was classified. So I couldn't share any of that information or design or technology, which is Class 1 crypto, with any of the rest of the people who were working on the project. Marty Hellman and with Diffie, of course, announced the possibility of public key crypto in 1977, but that was literally the year before the version of the internet you're using now was standardized, 1978. So we didn't get the opportunity to take heavy advantage of those ideas until they became implementable with things like RSA and so on, and then available. So at this stage of the game in 2011, we have mechanisms that we can use for very strong authentication, which I believe should be and can be retrofitted into the internet. We could make arguments about whether you should start all over again. There are clean sheet efforts that the National Science Foundation is sponsoring. But there are many things that we could do now and have done. The domain name system is increasingly secured by DNSSEC, which is the digital signing of entries in the domain name system, so you can't spoof a response if your software that receives the lookup verifies the digital signature. The same kinds of things are being looked at for the routing system. It's called RPKI, which is the use of public key crypto in order to detect that someone is attempting to hijack an address in the internet routing system by announcing an address that they don't own or they don't have authority to make use of. So there are a collection of those sorts of things. I'm a big fan of getting rid of passwords because all of us, you and me included, pick really bad passwords, and then we use them over and over again for different things, and as soon as one thing is broken, they're all broken. So the ideal thing would be to have two-factor authentication, devices that generate random numbers which never get repeated, at least over very long cycles. At Google, we've been forced to use devices that generate 6-digit passwords every 30 seconds. And the reason we have is that people have broken into some of the Google systems by either manually cracking passwords or possibly by guessing them. And so passwords are not enough anymore for us. There are a whole series of things that can and should be done. The biggest threat today for security on the internet, in my opinion, is the browser which is naive about downloading a web page that has a bunch of executable software in it, Java or JavaScript or Python. The problem is that browsers have more authority than they should have when they're executing on top of the operating system, and the operating systems are not very good at defending themselves. So you go to a web page. This is called the drive-by download. Where you go to a website, you pull in the file, you interpret the file, and the file has pieces of virus in it. The virus executes, and it stores something in the operating system because the operating system didn't defend itself. Now it turns into a zombie, and your machine becomes part of a botnet. So we have to do a much better job of making browsers that are paranoid and operating systems to go along with that, to isolate and confine the freedom that the applications have to touch memory and disk storage and everything else. And only then will we have a much more secure system than we have today.
Well, Vint had earlier also mentioned the authentication, and passwords are part of that. But as your mobile device continues to have much more access to much more information, and particularly become a financial tool rather than the credit card, the whole issue of authentication, I think, becomes more critical.
Yes.
I just noticed that in India, they've now launched a program to use biometrics to identify, give an identity to, it's voluntary, but they're aiming at every single resident of India. It's to help with providing assistance to different people, and there's a lot of corruption involved with existing systems. And so they are using a fingerprint, and they are using, I think, an eye scan. These are easily done on a cell phone, and so I think that, indeed, that's probably the direction we're going, is to make it much more automatic. That it's going to be much more critical, and I think using various biometrics are going to be the way to go.
So Rajesh Gupta wants.
I wanted to turn the attention on the endpoints. We normally think of internet as connecting endpoints with IP addresses as engineers. The reality is that the economics and the social aspects of what the endpoints are is very different. For example, when you have endpoints as machines or humans talking to each other, the tariff system and the revenues that we collect for connecting whatever service we do is very different than when the machines talk to each other, for example. Similarly, and there was quite a bit of reference to India and in how the market is evolving there. A couple of observations, again, come up very dramatically. One is that the data is still very expensive, even though the voice is very cheap. Whatever the economic model is, that is what is behind Twitter, because when you do SMS, you don't go into data side and you, it's a different economics. Now, coming back to the endpoints with machines, we could put instrumentation on campuses and buildings that can monitor things. But one of the feedback we got from our network services was, we are not here to maintain communications between machines. So a question I wanted to ask this panel, and what your outlook is, the infrastructure of internet allows a lot more machine-to-machine communications possible. But the economics is just not supporting it, the revenue plans and subscriptions and so on. And if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, one of the machine-to-machines that, of course, was very early on was, and I'm not sure I got the full thrust of your question because I couldn't quite hear, but has been the e-readers and books being transmitted wirelessly, and so from one machine to another machine, in a sense, although you initiate it. And there, the full expense is picked up in the price of the book, so that you're not really paying for a separate internet connection.
So did I understand correctly, just on the book thing, that Amazon announced that it is selling more online copies of books now than in hard copies?
That's correct.
Which is really interesting.
Now, e-readers is a great example, but if you look at the infrastructure that is emerging, for example, in support of a smart grid, that requires you to have some monitoring at the endpoints that goes to some other machine without humans in the loop, maybe in visualization or something. The question then comes up is, what kind of subscription plans or what kind of arrangements that will scale to a large number of sensing endpoints over wired or wired infrastructure that goes over internet would emerge going forward. Right now, we just buy modems and with subscriptions and that still turns out to be really expensive to do that. And we seem to have constructed internet a lot more because of legacy of humans at the endpoints and paying humans, of course. So.
Well, I mean, I think increasingly as humanity, we're depending upon the internet as our memory bank, as our brain. I mean, when's the last time that I can't personally, I mean, maybe it's just a mobile device, but I only remember the phone numbers from before I had a cell phone. I mean, I remember my father's cell phone number, and that's it, or his phone number, and my wife's phone number. That's basically it. So my memory has become so short-term that I'm completely dependent upon the internet. So I feel like I'm going to forever have to subscribe economically, no matter what the cost is, to my brain, which is the internet. And I think as humans and humanity, we are increasingly developing that dependency to a point in which we will be held hostage to, to this resource.
So Tom, did you want to get a response?
Yeah, actually, I wanted a different topic, so go ahead.
Oh, well, I just thought that it would be valuable for you to read a book by E.M. Forster called The Machine Stops. It was written back in the early 1900s, but it's very relevant to your question of dependence on the internet. However, I want to point out something to you. I live in Washington, D.C., and in 1 week we had an earthquake and Hurricane Irene, all within a few days' time. The side effect of that was loss of power at my house, which is terrifying because of the wine cellar and everything. And I stupidly, every time this happens, I think I'm going to put in a generator, and I never do. But the point I want to make is that we are more dependent on electricity than we are on anything else, as near as I can tell. And it's only stunningly rubbed in your face when you discover you can't get on the net. You can't, if you have batteries, they only have a finite lifetime. There's a whole lot of things that we can't do without electricity today. So if you want a stunning and shocking and scary example of dependence, start there and then come back later after you've done that and talk to me about internet.
So with that, I think we should thank our panelists. We are 20 minutes over.
We had scheduled a half-hour break, and if you have to take it, please feel free. But we'd like to try and get you back in here sooner because we have a full second session. So if we could try to shoot for 15 minutes, would be great.
But we get to come back.